which is what you can see on the slide here. So we're going to touch on each of these different programs and activities briefly today to give you a little basic information and hopefully answer any questions that you have. But the main goal of the WaterSMART program is to support water supply reliability, and we do that by working with our non-federal partners. So just a little overview information here. In the West, the WaterSMART program is looking to address different types of water supply needs and stressors that we see across the West. You can see some examples on this slide here. We have growing populations, we have, ag to urban transfers in water use, restoration needs driven sometimes in part by the growing demands. And then of course, we're dealing with droughts across different parts of the West. So these are all different stressors that we are hoping to address through the WaterSMART program in different ways. And we do a number of different things through the program. We increase water supply reliability with investments in projects. We help support water conservation and improved water management. We collaborate with lots of different non-federal stakeholders throughout the West to achieve all of these things, projects as well as planning efforts. And we do that by leveraging federal and non-federal funding. So not pretty much all of our programs under WaterSMART require a non-federal cost share, so that we're leveraging federal funding with matching non-federal funding to accomplish these goals. So the idea is that all these different activities we have under WaterSMART hopefully act as a sort of pipeline. So we have different types of activities. Some are focused more on planning. Some are focused on the development of science and tools. And then some are funding for actual on-the-ground projects. So, the idea is that we can fund these efforts from planning all the way through development and then actual on-the-ground construction through different parts of WaterSMART. So some basics that are generally true across all the different WaterSMART activities. Most WaterSMART activities are grant programs. There are a few internal activities that are part of WaterSMART, but for the most part, WaterSMART activities are grants. Generally speaking, there's some exceptions to this, which we'll talk about, but generally speaking, there is a 50% non-federal cost share required for all of the grants under WaterSMART. And then eligible applicants under different parts of the programs, this will vary depending on exactly which program or activity you're talking about, but generally speaking, applicants include entities such as states or divisions of states, tribes, cities, water districts, irrigation districts, watershed groups, nonprofits, flood control districts. I would throw wastewater districts in there too. The main requirement is that these entities must be located within the 17 Western states, or in some cases, depending on the program, entities and projects in Alaska and Hawaii are also eligible. Lastly, funding is allocated through annual competitive processes for all the WaterSMART activities. So, basically we issue funding opportunity announcements for each activity on an annual basis, inviting eligible applicants to apply for funding. We then take all of the eligible applicants, we convene an application review committee, which is made up of reclamation staff from all of our regions with relevant expertise. That application review committee then reviews each proposal and scores it based on the evaluation criteria specific to that program or activity. Scores them based on those criteria. They're then ranked and we allocate funding based on that ranking. So that's what we mean when we say a competitive process. It's that basic process for pretty much all the activities under WaterSMART. And with that, I will turn it over to Darian. He is going to talk about a few different parts of WaterSMART, and then he's going to cover Drought, Cooperative Watershed Management Program, the Water and Energy Efficiency Grants, since Josh couldn't be with us today, the small scale efficiency projects, And then we'll shift gears again, and I'll talk again about the Title 16 program, the wind desalination funding, and we'll do a little demo of our data visualization tool.
Awesome. Thanks, Amanda. So again, Darian Mayhorn. So first, just want to point out our drought response program. So our drought response program has 3 sub-activities. So like that kind of chart that Amanda showed earlier, or kind of figure, I guess you could say, that showed kind of like the ladder progression, where we have planning that then leads into implementation. We have the same thing with the drought response program. So we have a funding opportunity for drought contingency planning, where eligible entities can request up to $200,000 to develop or update a drought plan. And we have some programmatic requirements around what that final plan should look like. Then the drought residency projects, that's where applicants can then implement different mitigation actions that they've identified from previous planning efforts. And they can request up to $1.5 million for those projects. We have the funding opportunity announcement for the drought residency projects out this summer. It closed at the beginning of August, and we're currently in the evaluation process for those proposals that were submitted by the beginning of August, excuse me. And then finally, we have the emergency response actions, which for those of you that have been around for a while, in the past, this was really all that Reclamation did through our drought program. Let's say that someone needed assistance drilling an emergency well, we would be able to provide that. But in 2015, we reformulated the program and kind of gave it more of a proactive approach and put more emphasis on that drought planning and drought resiliency projects. But that last component, the emergency response actions, is still an option. And just wanted to point out, since 2015, the program has provided over $41 million in competitively awarded funding for drought planning and drought resiliency. And that map that you see there just shows you the projects across the West that we funded, or I should start first with the shapes, the polygon type shapes. Those are the planning areas where we've done drought plans, and then the points on the map are those different implementation projects. Okay, Amanda. Thanks. So again, the drought contingency planning, it's for the development and update of drought plans. It requires a 50% non-federal cost share. And again, you can request up to $200,000, and this is authorized through the Drought Act. Then on those drought resiliency projects that I mentioned, that are kind of the next step, the implementation projects, they have a wide variety of different types of activities that you can undertake. It could be infrastructure improvement projects. So let's say a new pipeline or a new intertie, additional water storage projects, whether that be for, an above ground water storage tank or aquifer storage and recovery. We also provide funding for projects that capture and treat alternative supplies, so small kind of water reuse type projects. We also provide funding for decision support tools and modeling and measurement projects. We've seen a good deal of those folks coming to develop different models, or having a suite of information from different weather stations and things, but wanting to be able to put it all together in a way that's most effective for the different stakeholders to be able to rely on that information and make decisions from it. That's a project type that folks can do. And again, like I said, they can request up to $1.5 million. We've got 2 different funding groups. One is for up to $500,000 for 2 years, and then funding group 2 is where they can request up to $1.5 million. The project needs to be completed within 3 years. And the criteria for this funding opportunity focuses on building long-term resilience to drought. So the Cooperative Watershed Management Program, you can see there kind of the same idea as the drought response program, that map that shows where we've selected projects for phase 1 and phase 2 for the Cooperative Watershed Management Program. And phase 1, just at a high level, is to form a watershed group or to develop a restoration plan or do project design. And then phase 2 is for the implementation of on-the-ground watershed management projects. So phase 1, eligible project activities are to develop a watershed group, conduct some outreach activities, gather data about the watershed, develop watershed restoration plans, and then to also develop watershed management project designs. This is one of our funding opportunities where there is no federal cost share requirement, and applicants can request up to $100,000 in reclamation funding over 2 years. And for the evaluation criteria, it's primarily focused on the project's benefits. And then for phase 2, the one thing that I'll just point out first here is that to be an eligible applicant, you must be an established watershed group. And to clarify, you don't have to be a watershed group that was developed under phase 1 of our program. You just have to be a watershed group. But then these are kind of the on-the-ground watershed management projects, right? So projects that will enhance riparian vegetation, make improvements to water delivery systems, increase in-stream flows, invasive species control, fish passage, and stream channel reconstruction and bank stabilization projects. This one does have a 50% non-federal cost share requirement, and applicants can request up to $300,000 in reclamation funding. And the evaluation criteria focuses on, again, the project benefits, as well as what watershed restoration planning has already been done for this implementation project. The next program is the WaterSMART Grants. Most folks are probably very familiar with WaterSMART Grants, especially the water and energy efficiency grants. And there are 3 components right there: water and energy efficiency grants, small scale water efficiency projects, and then the water marketing strategy grants. We'll walk through each one. So the water and energy efficiency grants, these are kind of big common water conservation projects, right? So canal lining and piping projects, municipal metering, irrigation flow measurement, landscape irrigation measures. So going to turf replacement, as well as hydropower. We have 2 funding groups. Funding group 1, applicants can request up to $500,000 to get the project completed within 2 years. And then under funding group 2, applicants can request up to $2 million and complete the project within 3 years. The criteria focuses on quantifying water savings. So that's a pretty important component. So just to maybe provide a kind of a distinction would be that in the drought response program, the drought residency projects, we might be trying to understand, of the water right that an applicant already has, but perhaps they don't have the infrastructure to tap into a certain supply source. How will that help them build resiliency, right? How will those perhaps additional water supplies help them during the next drought? Or how will it allow them to just better manage the supplies that they already have? Here with the water and energy efficiency grants, we're specifically looking to see how are you conserving water, right? What the water that that this project would help save, and then I think also having an idea of what happens with those savings. So just for an idea of the fiscal year 20 process for this program, we selected 54 projects. We, in total, including federal and non-federal funding, anticipate $147 million in improvements. And those projects are anticipated to save over 65,000 acre feet. Let's see, the small scale water efficiency projects. This is basically the little brother of the water energy efficiency grants. It is pretty much the exact same project types. The only big differences are the amount of funding that can be requested. Applicants can only request up to $75,000 in funding here, for a maximum total project cost of $200,000 per project. And then the evaluation criteria is much, much simplified in comparison to the water energy efficiency grants. One of the things that we really want to understand is just what are the benefits to the applicant. We don't go through the same effort of having the applicant quantify these benefits for us in the same way that we do for the water and energy efficiency grants. It's much more of a kind of qualitative description of the benefits, as well as what previous planning has been completed that supports the project. Those are just kind of pretty important things for the small scale water efficiency projects. For those of you that have been around for a while, the implementation projects that previously were under the Water Conservation Field Services Program that's administered by each region within Reclamation, this was intended to kind of replace that. The implementation projects that were previously under field services are now under WaterSMART Grants as small scale water efficiency projects. And we're able to offer that funding opportunity across the West now within WaterSMART in ways that when it was previously administered by the regions, it was not available across the entire West. And then the last program, or funding opportunity, I should say, under the WaterSMART Grants is the Water Marketing Strategy Grants. And the objective is to, I think, just really assist folks that are interested in determining if a water market will work for them. So the different eligible activities are outreach and partnership building, scoping and planning, and then the actual development of a water marketing strategy document. And within that development of that strategy, applicants have the opportunity to, do a legal review, do an engineering review, right? Have a kind of deep dive understanding of if this is something that's actually even feasible for them. And then lastly, for those folks that, are kind of past that theoretical stage of, is this something that we can actually even entertain, right? Folks that have kind of a baseline understanding and are in their place to be able to pilot, they're able to do that, right? Do some pilot activities to kind of further develop their strategy and build it out more. Applicants can request up to $200,000 for a 2-year project, and then applicants can request up to $400,000 for a 3-year project. And I will hand it back to Amanda now.
Thanks, Darian. Okay, so I am going to cover the Basin Study program and the Title 16 program and the wind desalination project funding opportunity announcement. We'll start off with the Basin Study program. You may have noticed that within WaterSMART, which is itself an umbrella program, we also have other umbrella programs. So WaterSMART Grants, for example, there's 3 different categories of WaterSMART Grants. Same is true for the Basin Study program. There's the overarching Basin Study program, but it includes multiple different activities and opportunities for funding. The Basin Study program actually includes both external funding opportunity announcements and internal funding that we provide within Reclamation for technical work. So mostly I'm going to focus on the external opportunities today, which would include the basin studies themselves, water management options pilots, and applied science grants. We also have internal applied science grants where we provide funding to Reclamation technical staff to conduct applied science work. And we also have what we call baseline assessments, which are basically developing baseline information about water supplies and demands across the West as authorized by Section 9503 of the Secure Water Act. But today, like I said, I'm going to focus on the external opportunities here. Okay, so first off is the basin studies. So basin studies are a little different from some of the other activities that we've talked about so far in that they are not actually grants. They are collaborative studies where Reclamation works with non-federal cost share partners to evaluate current and future water supplies and demands across basins in the West and develop strategies to ensure reliable water supplies in the future. So basically, we're working on a basin-wide basis with non-federal stakeholders to identify what supplies and demands may look like out into the future, how the current system might react to that, those future supplies and demands, and then to develop strategies that have buy-off from all of the stakeholders in the basin that could help meet future demands. Eligible applicants for basin studies include states, tribes, water districts, cities, and basically any entity that has water delivery or management authority. And under Basin Studies, often we'll have multiple non-federal cost share partners. And then in addition to those non-federal cost share partners, there will be lots of different non-federal participants in the basin study, because the whole goal is to really involve all of the stakeholders in a basin. There, much like the other parts of WaterSMART, there is a 50% non-federal cost share requirement. And as I already mentioned, basin studies are not grants. So instead, Reclamation comes to the table with half the cost of the study, and the non-federal cost share partners come to the table with half the cost of the study, and then we carry it out together. So Reclamation's funding is generally used for reclamation staff time or reclamation contracts or interagency agreements. And it just really depends on the specific basin study and what's needed, and what expertise is needed and who has that expertise. So to date, Reclamation has initiated 27 basin studies in 15 Western states. 17 of those basin studies are now complete. We haven't funded new basin studies in the last couple years, but it may be that we start funding them again in the future. We're just not really sure at this point, but there are a number of ongoing basin studies still right now. Very closely related to the basin studies are what we call water management options pilots. These are basically follow-on efforts to completed basin studies. So a basin study is really, a very early assessment sort of study. It's not a feasibility study. It's not even an appraisal study. So where each basin study ends is different depending on the basin and what information was available and what was needed. But generally speaking, when they do end, there's still a lot more work that needs to be done to get anywhere near being able to actually implement anything that's coming out of the basin study. So that's where some of these water management options pilots come in. So these are collaborative efforts where Reclamation is working with non-federal stakeholders you could do any number of things really through these. They're pretty open. So it could be that you are doing analysis to further advance some strategies identified in the basin study to try and get them one step closer to actually being able to implement them. It could be that the analysis in the basin study was somewhat constrained by the budget and time frame of the basin study, and so there's just more technical analysis that needs to be done on the data collection side or the modeling side. So that could be a water management option pilot. Or it could be that just new information has come out since you completed your basin study, like new climate change projections or a new operations model or something like that would greatly improve the basin study. And that could be a water management options pilot as well, where you could actually go back and use that new information to redo some of the analysis that was done in the basin study originally. So it's a very broad activity. The eligible applicants are basically any entity that is located within a basin that has a completed basin study and participated in some way in that original basin study. So again, pretty open. There is a 50% non-federal cost share required here again. And these pilots also are like basin studies in that they're not grants, they are collaborative efforts. So again, Reclamation comes to the table with half the cost and the non-federal cost share partners come to the table with half the cost. And then we actually conduct the pilot jointly. And these, we actually just had the deadline for the letters of interest for FY21 funding for these. So this is an ongoing activity where Reclamation is offering funding on a regular basis for these. Next up is the applied science grants. So these are in fact grants like the earlier activities we talked about where we're providing grant funding to the non-federal project sponsors. Eligible projects include things like improving or enhancing model capabilities, improving or adapting forecasting tools and technologies, or improving access to and use of water resources data. So you'll notice there's a theme here that these are technical efforts. Eligible applicants, again, very similar to the other parts of WaterSMART. It's states, tribes, irrigation districts, water districts, universities, nonprofit research institutions. Those are two that are somewhat unique here into the Cooperative Watershed Management Program. And then any other organization with water or power delivery authority. And then also just generally nonprofit organizations, not necessarily research institutions. Again, there's a 50% non-federal cost share required here. 2 different funding groups, up to $150,000 for 2-year projects, up to $300,000 for 3-year projects. Okay, so that's the Basin Study program. You know, as I mentioned, there are some other internal activities that Reclamation conducts under that program that inform reclamation operations, as well as go into the Secure Water Act report that is required under Section 9503 of the Secure Water Act that we submit to Congress every 5 years. So moving on to the Title 16 program. So the Title 16 program is Reclamation's Water Reclamation and Reuse Grant Program. The eligible types of projects under Title 16 kind of fall into 2 main categories. We, under the program, provide funding for projects that reclaim and reuse wastewater, and that could be municipal wastewater, industrial wastewater, agricultural wastewater. It doesn't really matter what kind of wastewater it is, or projects that reclaim and reuse impaired ground and surface waters. The one exception there is where the main impairment is high TDS. We now have a new funding opportunity announcement for desal projects that I'll talk about here in a minute. But any other kind of impairment, that project would be eligible here under Title 16. There's 2 different ways for projects to be eligible under the Title 16 program. Back when the program started in 1992, from 1992 through 2016, in order for Reclamation to be able to provide construction funding for a project, it had to be specifically authorized by Congress. So we have a universe of 53 congressionally authorized Title 16 projects that made up the program until the end of 2016. Then in December of 2016, Congress passed the Water Infrastructure Improvements for the Nation Act, or as we call it, the WIN Act, which included amendments to the Title 16 authority, which basically opened the program up and gave Reclamation the authority to provide grant funding for construction of water reclamation and reuse projects once Reclamation makes some basic determinations about that project. It's then eligible to compete for funding. So basically no longer have to have a congressional authorization to be eligible for construction funding under the Title 16 program, thanks to the WIN Act amendments. One way in which the Title 16 program is very different from the other parts of WaterSMART is that there is a 75% non-federal cost share required instead of a 50% non-federal cost share. And the federal cost share is capped at 25% of the total project cost, up to a maximum of $20 million per project, unless Congress has specified otherwise. So when you're looking at that old universe of the 53 congressionally authorized projects, in some of those project authorizations, Congress specifically set a different federal funding ceiling that is larger than $20 million. But otherwise, $20 million applies across the board. In 2019, projects funded through the Title 16 program delivered over 511,000 acre feet of recycled water in Western states. So, the program's been around for a while, and we obviously are already seeing a lot of on-the-ground impacts of the projects funded under this program. Next is the WIN Act desalination projects. I mentioned this a minute ago because now projects that are focused on, where the main impairment is high TDS, or really it's a desalination project, those projects now fall under this new funding opportunity announcement, which was also authorized by the WIN Act, different section of the WIN Act, amended the Water Desalination Act of 1996 to give Reclamation the authority to provide funding for construction of full-scale ocean water and brackish water desalination projects. So basically any ocean or brackish water desalination project could be eligible here for funding. Again, there's some basic requirements that the Act requires that, basic determinations that the Act requires that Reclamation make before a project is eligible to compete for funding. Both for Title 16 and for these WIN Act desalination projects, Reclamation makes those determinations through the review of a feasibility study for the project. So basically the first step to being eligible to compete for funding is a project sponsor has to submit a feasibility study to Reclamation for review, and Reclamation then reviews that feasibility study, ensures that it meets all of the program requirements, which are laid out in our directive and standard for Title 16 and Wind Desalination Act, Wind Desalination Project feasibility studies. And once Reclamation's determined the feasibility study meets the requirements, then the project is eligible to compete for funding under our annual funding opportunity announcements. Very similar here to Title 16, there's a 75% non-federal cost share required. Maximum federal cost share is up to $20 million per project. And that is wind desalination. It is very similar to Title 16, in part because desalination projects prior to the passage of the Wind Act really were just considered part of the Title 16 program. So there are some older Title 16 project authorizations that are brackish water desalination projects. So this is a table just to give you a general feel for funding under the program as a whole. We've broken it out by activity here and then also totaled it so you can see the total program appropriations by year. It looks like there's a big drop here, but this is what the president's budget has looked like the last 2 years also, and then final enacted appropriations obviously are very different. So it's not unusual, I guess that's to say. That's what I'm trying to get at. It's not unusual that this number is so much smaller than enacted appropriations. The markups we've seen so far indicate that we would see a similar level of final enacted appropriations to 2019 and 2020. Okay, so the last thing we want to do is walk you through our WaterSMART Data Visualization Tool. So, in Darian's slides, he had some of those maps showing you the different projects that we funded under the different activities. So back a few years ago, Reclamation developed what we call the WaterSMART Data Visualization Tool to try and improve how we share information about the program. And what I'm going to do is try and just see if I can pull it over here and walk you through it. So bear with me for one sec. Just gonna see if it'll pull up for me. Okay. So the link to the data visualization tool is on our WaterSMART program webpage on Reclamation's main website. It's right here, data visualization, WaterSMART data visualization tool, and you just click on this link and it'll launch the tool. Hopefully my internet is not too slow today. There we go. It'll get there. So basically, the idea behind the tool is we wanted there to be an interactive way for us to share information about the WaterSMART program. So what we've got is a few different ways to look at the information and interact with the information. We have some general narratives about the WaterSMART program as a whole, and then we also have different ways to navigate in between the individual programs that are part of WaterSMART. So for example, over here, you can see these have each program that we just talked about that you can click on to get more information about that specific project or that specific program, and it'll have a narrative about that program. But then there's also different ways that you can actually interact with the information, including a map, which is what you saw on Darian's slides. So for each program, you can see the individual projects funded under that program. And there's lots of tools up here so that you can filter the information. You can show it in different ways. You can zoom in or zoom out. So if you're interested in a specific area, let's say you want to see, there's so many in Southern California, but let's say you wanted to see the Title 16 projects in Southern California. Right now, we're actually looking at construction projects, feasibility studies, and research projects, and that's why you see these different colored dots. But you can click on any one of these dots and it'll show you what that project is. So for example, this is the Rancho California Water District congressionally authorized project. It's going to show you the year that that project was authorized, how much funding has been provided to date, and then it gives you a brief description of what that project is. And that's true for any one of these dots. You can click on them. So this was a feasibility study that was conducted by the Eastern Municipal Water District, tells you the year it was selected for funding, its current status is now completed, how much funding was received, and then again, a brief description. So this is a great way if you're curious, like what projects have been funded in my area and what do they look like? You can look at these maps for any of the programs. They're available for each program. And then if you want to, you can, filter it based on the layers. So for example, if we, let's say we only want to see research studies, we can change the layers so that now we're just seeing the research studies that were funded in Southern California, or if we back it up, we can see the ones that are funded anywhere, although I'm pretty sure most of them are in California. I guess we got one here in Colorado. But so the idea is that you can go and interact with the information on these different programs. We also include featured projects for the different programs. So if you click on Explore Featured Projects, you then can get a little more information about a few projects that we've sort of picked to highlight, and you can scroll through them down here. So there's a few different ones, and it'll show you, where it is and give you a little information about the project and some pictures. So the hope is that, we've created an interactive tool that folks can use to interact with information about WaterSMART and get a better feel for what it is that we're doing through the program as a whole. So that is the data visualization tool. And I think the only thing we had left, I think, was a question slide. Yep, and contact info. So I am the program manager for Title 16 and Basin Studies. Darian manages the Drought Response Program. Josh manages WaterSMART Grants. So, and any of the activities in between there, you could contact any one of us and we can help put you in touch with the right person. If we're not the program coordinator, or if you can't remember which one of us does which, you can call any of us really, and we can make sure you get to the right place. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us, call us, email us. We're always happy to talk about the program and answer any questions.
Great, thanks, Amanda and Darian. That concludes the presentations. So now we're going to move into the questions and answers for right now. You can do that either by unmuting yourself and asking a question, or you can use the chat feature and I can read those aloud.
Hey, Deb, this is Tony. Hi, Darian. Actually,
Hey, Tony.
ask a question about the applied science grants. And if you could give some examples specifically related to the access to data. And is that under the Basin Studies program?
Yeah, so maybe Amanda, we might be able to double team this,
Yeah.
or you can take it on first. You let me know.
So it is part of the Basin Study program. It's one of the activities under the Basin Study program. It is a newer activity. We used to fund applied science grants through the 2 landscape conservation cooperatives that Reclamation participated in, along with the Fish and Wildlife Service. But since those, no longer really exist, basically we revamped those applied science grants to now be a West-wide grant opportunity. In terms of data accessibility, I don't know any of the projects well enough to know if we funded any like that. I don't know, Darian, if you know.
No, I mean, and I don't think we've had any projects yet that have been completed under this new kind of, applied science grants to even know what that would look like yet. So Tony, just to make sure we understand, so are you getting at have there been any projects that have been focused on making data more accessible, or is your question, is the data accessible from these different completed projects?
Grants to make the data accessible.
More accessible.
You
Yeah, I
probably
know.
that we have a water data exchange that we've worked with. And I believe I've heard that the Internet of Water group, that Peter Callahan is the director, is working with New Mexico on, if not a grant, a proposal for a grant there.
Yeah, I know that. I mean, actually, where you are out in Utah, I remember hearing about kind of a collective of folks out in Utah that wanted to do some work on making basically data related to drought more accessible. And that was their whole deal. Like they wanted to make kind of like a, Texas has like their Water for Texas website and all these, this platform where you can go and find precip and stream flow and all this data pretty easily. I know that some folks in Utah were looking to do something like that. I think under the applied science, but I think that's something me and Amanda could probably look into and see if we could find some examples and share with you.
Yeah, I mean,
Thanks, I appreciate it.
something that does come to mind is that we do share any of the West-wide work that we do under the Basin Study program. That's more like those baseline assessments where we've developed West-wide stream flow projections out into the future with the impacts of climate change considered. That is publicly available. And then we also have done work on agricultural demands and reservoir evaporation, and that information is publicly available. They're all kind of separate, unfortunately, but I know that information is out there, and we could definitely provide the links to that.
Thank you.
Looks like Michelle Bushman has raised her hand. Did you go ahead, Michelle?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, good. I had a question, and Tony, maybe you can pitch in and help me if I don't understand the question I'm actually asking, but we were recently looking at S4189, which is Senator Wyden's from Oregon, some legislation on Water Conservation and Farming Act, and they want to change some of the WaterSMART language when it comes to conservation. I don't know if you guys are familiar with it or not, but my question is, I'm actually curious how you guys measure conservation now, because we were a little bit confused about how you guys would end up measuring the conservation if this bill passed. So just if you're not familiar with it, the language right now prevents the use of grant funds for using those water savings to increase total irrigated acreage of the eligible applicant, or otherwise increase the consumptive use of water in the operation of the eligible applicant as determined pursuant to the law of the state. And that's the key for us is, okay, well, how do you guys do that pursuant to the law of the state? And then it would change if this bill was to pass to say that they couldn't increase the consumptive use of water for agricultural operations above the pre-project levels as determined pursuant to the law of the state. That may be a little bit confusing if you're not actually reading the language, but I was just curious if you guys know how you currently measure the water savings, either compared to the pre-existing levels, and how you maybe coordinate that with the state if you do at all.
This is when it would be good if Josh was here. Because we have seen that draft bill. I know that Josh and Dean Maroney in our group have both worked on looking at that language and providing comments on that language. I don't know, Darian, were you? I wasn't involved in that.
I haven't been part of that one.
Yeah. I think generally speaking, the simple response is that if in the WaterSMART Grants funding opportunity announcement, there's a lot of detailed language in there already about that issue. And I think the general response that I've at least just seen at a glance has been that, Reclamation already has all these things in place to ensure that these grants aren't increasing the consumptive use, and that, that would be our plan going forward still. And that, if any changes were required, then we would make those revisions, but that, we are already doing that through the program, and we would continue doing that. And yeah, sorry, that's not a good answer to how we do it. But if you look at the funding opportunity announcement, My understanding is that it lays it out pretty clearly in there, exactly how we're doing that.
Okay, we'll go take a look.
And I think some of what Michelle was getting to is, it's understandable that if the federal agency is providing funds to assist in a conservation effort, that they ensure that that water is not otherwise used by the applicant to increase their consumptive use. However, if it goes beyond the individual applicant, it seems to me to be very difficult for Reclamation to implement any kind or enforce any kind of restriction on the use of that water after it leaves the applicant's property. Particularly as it goes to state law, any water that would be saved and returned to the stream becomes public waters of the state, and would be subject to prior appropriative rights.
Right.
Okay. Any other questions out there? I'm not seeing any. So I think that concludes our presentation today.
Deb, I do have one more question. It appears
Okay.
that we do have some folks on the phone from Alaska.
Okay.
Which of these programs could Alaska participate in?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, and welcome to the folks from Alaska that are joining us. So just, what was it, within the last fiscal year, so Reclamation got the authority to be able to provide financial assistance under the Secure Water Act to folks out in Alaska and Hawaii. And folks in Alaska would be eligible for the Drought Resiliency projects, the Water and Energy Efficiency Grants, the SmallScale Water Efficiency projects, and I want to say maybe the Water Marketing Strategy Grants. I feel like because all three of those all rely on the Secure Water Act. So if I had to guess, I'd say the Drought Resiliency projects and then everything on the WaterSMART grants. Many of the other programs have different authorities that they rely on, right, Amanda? When you
That's
think
right.
that it's just like those, okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like Title 16, for example, specifically includes Hawaii, but not Alaska. So under that one, it's just Hawaii, not Alaska, and then the
Right.
17 Western states.
Yeah, same issue with the drought planning. Drought planning includes Hawaii, but it doesn't include Alaska. So it always just goes back to whatever authority it is that we're using. So Tony, did you catch that? So the drought resiliency projects, and then the suite under WaterSMART grants, which includes water energy efficiency grants, small scale water efficiency projects, and water marketing strategy grants.
Thanks.
No problem.
If they want any more, I'll tell them to take it up with Senator Murkowski.
Right.
Good. Okay. I think that's it. So
Thanks to both of you, and Deb.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks for
everyone
having
for
us.
joining. Thank you, Amanda and Darian, for your time and efforts here. And have a great afternoon.
Okay, you
Thanks,
too.
you
Thank
too.
you.
Thanks a lot.